What stops us to impose a fixed tax of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000?
In fact, Mifta Ismail didn't come up with this.
But then there was a tweet. You see, if there was a plan B, there was no need for State Bank to issue this circular after midnight, lifting all restrictions on import last week. And plan B is simply getting rollovers from our friendly countries. My personal hunch is that even this 0.3% GDP growth that government feels last national accounts number, even these are very optimistic. So exporters, they were not able to export, especially after super floods.
Hello and welcome to InferTalks, a podcast where we put you in the room with some of the biggest thought leaders from around the world. Joining us today is a leading economist in Pakistan's policy landscape. My guest today is Dr. Abid Suleri. Dr. Suleri is the Executive Director at Sustainable Development Policy Institute. He's also member Pakistan Climate Change Council and Board of Directors, National Disaster Risk Management. Previously, he served for 3 terms as member of PM's Economic Advisory Council. Dr. Abid Suleri, welcome to InferTalks.
Thank you.
Dr. Abid Suleri, let's start our conversation. And I think one of the most perennial issues that we've been facing is with our foreign exchange reserves. The government has actually decided to incorporate new taxes worth rupees 215 billion. And then at the same time, hinted at restructuring the pension program. Do you think, are we still out of the woods to secure an IMF deal?
Hopefully. One can say that perhaps it's too late, but even if we can get this staff level agreement before 30th of June, at least some inflow of dollar would start. And that inflow of dollar is vital right now. Keep on repeating that plan A, plan B, plan C, all of them ultimately they end up culminating at the IMF program, Pakistan being an IMF program, our creditworthiness, our help from other bilateral and multilateral lenders. So all of it is directly dependent on IMF. And it's late, but at least government is now making the right moves. One can talk of perhaps some of the individual measures when we talk at granular levels, but keeping IMF on your side, that is what is required in Pakistan's economy right.
So, Dr. Abid, if I could ask you, you said it's it's coming quite late enough now. When would you have expected such a thing to take place? At least when the government has actually or had taken the reins of power.
Yes, one of the criticisms that was made on PTI government was about this untargeted fuel subsidy. Now, one was expecting that when PDM government will come into power, they will immediately withdraw those fuel subsidy and they will go back to IMF program. That could not happen. If you look at the tenure in which this fuel subsidy was given, it was more subsidy was given in PDM than in PTI regime. PTI only provided this subsidy for 4 or 5 weeks, whereas PDM government, Mifta Ismail, when they actually negotiated 7th and 8th review, they had been providing that subsidy for at least 3 months. Later on, when Pakistan received the tranche, Pakistan again went off track on whatever they had committed with the IMF. And perhaps we were expecting that due to the floods, there would be some inflows of dollar which would relieve us from dependency on IMF. That never happened. So even if you look at the Geneva pledges, the fate of Geneva pledges, around $10 billion pledges, only $300 million could come. And the reason was almost $8.5 billion of those pledges were to come from ADB and World Bank and Islamic Development Bank, etc. And they linked their release of their tranches with the IMF. So I would have expected that in September, at the start of 7th review and 9th review, we should have actually fulfilled our commitment so that we could complete the program. And right now, rupee would have been stable. economy would have been stable, and all the painful process through which people and government of Pakistan has to pass through, at least some of it could have been minimized.
Let's speak of one of the other tough measures that is expected of Pakistan, and that has been to secure different stopgap financial arrangements from friendly countries. Why has the IMF actually come up with this condition in the first place?
Well, this is a very standard condition. Lenders of last resort, that is IMF, they have to see the plan, and they have to see that whatever they will be providing, that doesn't go to any bilateral lender in one go, because they're providing it to stabilize balance of payment. And this is not some differential treatment with Pakistan. Sri Lanka declared default, and they got this IMF package bailout after 1.5 years. Similarly, Zambia, it got this plan after 3 years, because after declaring default, because IMF's conditionality was that they have to go to each bilateral lender and negotiate debt rescheduling, debt restructuring with them. So if debt rescheduling is not done, rescheduling means that extending or prolonging the period in which debt has to be returned. If that is not done by a country which is defaulting or a country which is facing a debt crisis, it means that whatever tranche you will receive from IMF, you will simply paying back to that country, and your actual problem of a shortage of dollars would stay there. And this is what IMF was asking Pakistan to do.
So speaking of debt restructuring, sir, would it have to be negotiated separately with each country, or does it have to be done collectively with each lender?
Well, debt structuring has to be negotiated with each country. In our case, thanks God, it's still not debt restructuring. It is rollovers. Rollover and debt restructuring, they are two different things. Rollover.
And what's the difference?
Rollover means that I pay you whatever I owe you, and then you return it to me. So technically, I'm not defaulting. So if I owe you something, I pay you, and very next day, you return the same to me as a new loan. So that is rollover, where I'm at least paying. Restructuring is where I ask you to actually reduce my installment or reduce my debt. And rescheduling is where I say that I had to pay this loan in 5 years, why not to pay in 7 or 8 years, so that by installment it gets reduced. So these are three terms which are commonly used. So in our case, we were asked to get a assurance of rollovers, that whatever we will pay to Saudi Arabia and China and UAE, they will return, and they will do a rollover. They will again deposit it in our state bank.
So let me ask you one more thing about IMF. Is it a permanent solution to our economic woes?
In the short to medium term, of course, for next 5 years, one cannot think of staying without IMF unless and until we are ready to take some drastic measures. With IMF or without IMF, we need to take some drastic measures.
So when you speak of drastic measures, does it mean that Pakistan will have to take long-term fixes to fix the...
No, we have to do some structural reforms. All of us, we know that there are 212 public sector enterprises, loss-making public sector enterprises. We keep on pouring money in it, almost 500 billion rupees per annum. We know there is this energy surplus debt of 2.5 trillion rupees. We know there is a gas surplus debt of 1.5 trillion rupees. We know after 18th Amendment, we don't need to have cabinet of 100 persons at federal government when we have devolved most of the departments and ministries to provinces. We know that we can actually we could have got these pension reforms much earlier, rather than now when the total pension bill is higher than the total salaries which are payable. So these are the measures which we need to take. These are sort of black holes in our economy, and if we don't fix them, we'll keep on borrowing. It is just like a leaky bucket in which you keep on pouring water. So the more you pour, the more it leaks, and that is somehow the problem with Pakistan's economy, that the structural issues, as long as they are there, we would keep on being dependent on IMF.
So what would you suggest in terms of, fixing some of these perennial crises or perennial issues that the economy is facing every year, or you could say at least for the past couple of decades that we've been confronting?
Listen, unfortunately, we keep on waiting till we reach to a point of no return before we take a step. For example, these pension reforms. So why to wait till IMF had to press us hard and only then to announce these pension reforms, which were much needed. Now, perhaps in the next program, which is a must, next program, IMF program is a must in next fiscal year. Without it, we cannot survive economically. Now, I hope that that program, as part of precondition, it may have something on privatization as well. Again, our sore point. So, instead of waiting for any third party or any external force or any agency like IMF telling us that we have to do this, we have to put our house in order. This is on expenditure side, but then there is also on revenue side. So on revenue side, for example, now this 215 billion tax, you and I and on salaried persons, they are getting taxed at a higher slab now, 2.5% increase in their taxes. While the retailers, we have around 20 million retailers, tier 2 retailers, who have the commercial connection. I'm not talking of shopkeepers in any local mahalla and local locality. I'm talking of those who have this commercial electricity connection. So what stops us to impose a fixed tax of 1,000, 2,000, 3,000?
In fact, Mifta Ismail didn't come up with this.
But then there was a tweet.
Why didn't the government follow through with that?
As I told you, there was a tweet, and then Mifta had to withdraw it. So, and similarly, the taxation on transport sector, the taxation on services sector, taxation on agriculture, income on agriculture, and I'm not talking of small farmers. I'm talking of 20% large farmers, big farmers who have 80% of agriculture land in Pakistan. Their income from agriculture, that need to be taxed. So if we are not taxing the sectors which should be in tax net, if we are not actually reducing our spending on sectors where we know that those are just money is just going to black holes, then of course ultimately we end up going to IMF and China and Saudi Arabia and UAE. And
last year the government actually came up with the super tax, which was
after the floods on the.
Exactly. It was more focused on the industrialists. Did it bring about any change? How much revenue was the government able to generate as a consequence of that measure? I'm not trying to catch you off guard, but has it delivered any kind of substantive outcome?
If I remember correctly, that was challenged in the court and there was a stay order. So that super tax ended up in board and it never got materialized.
Interesting. Dr. Suleri, let me now ask you, we've spoken about the IMF. The government says we may have a plan B to, get our house in order without the IMF. Do you think is that possible, or do you think it's a mere?
You see, if there was a plan B, there was no need to for State Bank to issue this circular after midnight, lifting all restrictions on import last week. There was no need to revise the budget, and there was no need to actually withdraw many of the measures that were offered in the budget. So Plan B, even if there is any, is valid only till 12th of August.
And what's happening on
12th of August, when the current tenure of Parliament, the National Assembly.
All right.
And Plan B is simply rollovers, getting rollovers from our friendly countries. But after August, from September to December, we have to pay back, hoping around $6 billion we have to return. So in the first quarter of next fiscal year, from July to September, we need to return around $4.5 billion. So keeping in view our reserves, which are around $4 billion with the State Bank, less than $4 billion, perhaps government can keep on relying on rollovers, but in the next quarter, this amount it goes up to around $6 billion.
So to keep it precisely, you don't think there is a plan B other than
plan? As I already told you, plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D in the short to medium term is to be with the IMF and secure another IMF program.
So that's the only plan.
That's the only plan.
All right, sir. Now, moving on to our next question, and that has to do again with the long-term fixes, but this is more about building a broader consensus with different political stakeholders. I'm not trying to use politically loaded terms like the Charter of Economy. How do you go about building common denominators with different political actors to bring about some macroeconomic reforms? I know there will always be tweaks at the micro level, but how do you build a consensus when it comes to an economic roadmap?
Many of the issues that needed to be sorted in Pakistan's economy, they became victim of politics. So starting from privatization, when Shaukat Aziz, he was prime minister, he wanted to do it, and the privatization of Pakistan steel mills, it landed in Chief Justice Iftikhar Chaudhry's court, and it could never take off. To this taxation of retailers and taxation on income and agriculture. So all of this has been actually politicized. Now is a unique moment, and the unique is in the context that one can now say with some sort of confidence that the current PDM political parties, they are not facing a threat from their major political opponent PTI, which means that one of the parties present in PDM would be leading next government. So either it's PMLN or it's People's Party, and the composition of a coalition can be whatever, but one of them would be leading the next federal government. So if one of them would be leading the next federal government, it's in their interest to actually leave the house in order, remove the economic mess, so that when they form next cabinet and the next government, they find themselves in a much smoother landing. Now, in order to do it, they need to understand not to politicize many of the needed economic measures. And the example that I can quote here was this Mengai Macau March that PDM started in the last months of PTI, when PTI was trying to resuscitate IMF program, that compelled the former Prime Minister to announce those untargeted food subsidies. Now, I think that temptation of providing populist relief to calm down the political opposition, that always prevail. Yeah. And when we are talking of a minimum common denominator, we are talking of certain measures that should not get politicized. And if, as one can see, Asif Zardari, he is quite vocal about Charter of Economy. Prime Minister, since he was Chief Minister, he was quite vocal of Charter of Economy. As a leader of opposition, he offered to sign a Charter of Economy. So one hopes that the leadership of two large parties, they actually sit down and they agree not to politicize the economy, and that is the way forward, remaining under discipline of IMF and agreeing not to politicize economic measures, and then, of course, inclusion of all stakeholders. And here I would also like to appreciate the step taken, this Special Investment this Facilitation Council, where we see the representation of civilian and our military leadership as well. Now, that is important. All the stakeholders who have some say in decision making and who have some say in getting those decisions implemented, I think they need to be on the same page as far as economy is concerned. And I can give the examples of FANCI and FATF core cell when Pakistan was meeting all the obligations of FATF action plan. I think that sort of coordination is required, and if that happens, I can see a turnaround in economy. If that doesn't happen, unfortunately, then we will keep on being part of different IMF programs and keep on begging for tranche to tranche transactions.
So what would this super body exactly be doing? Would it be doing regulation, or will its mandate be actually more about facilitating coordination and the regulation will be left to institutes? And one more question. Wouldn't it be pertinent to have different institutes which are far more functional, which are far more efficient in terms of, providing the much needed regulation, a smoother regulation, if I could say, without compromising on principles, like the aspect of, one window operation or something along those lines, which makes it far more convenient for foreign investors to come and invest in Pakistan. So how do you see the supra body performing versus, mechanisms like one window operation?
Well, Pakistan is a country where we have no dearth of policies and plans and regulations. So you pick anything and you will find excellent plans about it. So it's about implementing it. And if you remember, PTI government, it made very sincere and honest efforts for bringing some investment. We saw the Saudi Crown Prince visiting Pakistan. We saw Mahathir Mohamad visiting Pakistan. We saw the highest leadership from China, from Turkey, from UAE visiting Pakistan, announcing billions of dollars of foreign direct investment. What happened? It never got materialized. What happened to the petrochemical refinery in Gwadar? It never got materialized. And the reason was that we hadn't had our homework done before signing those MOUs. We couldn't make a follow-up after signing those MOUs. In case of Saudi investment, we couldn't get land from the provincial government. Land acquisition became problem. In case of Chinese investment, security became problem. The attack on Chinese engineers in Dasu Dam. In case of Turkey, for the automobile investment, we never had those investment policies for the new entrants. So there were hiccups. And this supra body that I'm talking about, it is all about, when we talk of single window, it is about looking at making a matrix, looking at the hurdles, and then taking decisions there and then to actually get those hurdles removed. So in practice, if that can be done, in theory, I know that can be done. And we have seen it happening in NCOC. We have seen it happening in FATF. So in case of investment, if that can be done, I think that would be excellent. I'm not talking of $135, $140 billion investment, even if it is $10 billion investment. But we need to give this confidence to our investors that with the change in political faces, with the change of political parties, our policy consistency, policy continuity, that remains. In UK last year, there were 3 prime ministers who left 10 Downing Street. But the normal life and government policies, those remained. So similarly, in case of Pakistan, we need to actually graduate from that mindset that if one prime minister goes, everything simply topples and this political instability follows. So it is we are living in a democratic country, part of democracy. They would see many faces change according to democratic norms, but it should not affect our credit worthiness. It should not affect our credibility. It should not affect the trust that international community should have in Pakistan, because their trust is with the country, with the state, not with any single individual. Individuals come, individuals go. They may come again, like we saw PDM. They left after Panama and they came back. So individuals, they should not be the whole guarantor of our policy continuity. It should be some mechanism, and it should be state. And that's why I'm a proponent of such a supra body.
So as a consequence of this initiative, you see the overall coordination improving between different stakeholders to invite and remove any obstacles that there may be for investors. Let's come to our next question. And I'll ask you to be a little more empathetic to any foreign investor and assume yourself to be a foreign investor yourself. You're scouting the international market, looking for any country to invest your capital in. What are some of the factors that you will look for to invest your money?
It's a rule of law, it's policy consistency, where courts, their verdicts are respected, where policies, they don't change overnight, where entry and exit is smooth, where I can invest in a smooth manner and I can exit in a smooth manner. I can take back my dividends. I can repatriate my money. So these would be some of the considerations that every investor, and of course respect for intellectual property rights if I'm going to manufacture something in a country.
And so, let's speak of Pakistan in that particular case. What would you look for to, to come up with some durable solutions to regain the confidence of foreign investors, to invite them to come and invest in Pakistan?
First and foremost thing is this rule of law, where we know that this arbitration mechanism or this conflict resolution mechanism, it's functional. You don't have to spend whole life in getting a stay removed from courts. If you have certain plans, those can actually get materialized. If you have to repatriate or send your dividend back in dollars, there is no restriction. Finding trained human resources, respect of IPR. So these are some of the things which are a must and which is a standard requirement for any investment.
So what has the progress been so far on these verticals in Pakistan? And moreover, don't you think then something along those lines of Dubai International Financial Center would be something that Pakistan could adopt for different cities to invite foreign investors and park their money in those particular zones?
The problem is we take Dubai and China as our models, which we should not.
Why is that?
Because in Dubai and China, you can't think of protests, you can't think of sit-ins, you can't think of people coming on streets and marching for... those are, in the Gulf countries, they are monarchies. China, it's a one-party system. So we need to look at the peers where they have a multi-party system, where they have these democratic traditions. So if I assume that there would be no sit-in in Pakistan and there would be no protest in Pakistan and people, they won't come on streets, that is not going to happen. It would always remain the same. But having said it, the basic rule of law, the basic respect for your agreements and the basic respect for investors, that needs to be there. So, for example, I would try to look at my eastern neighbor, India. They have done magic. I would like to see Bangladesh. Again, it has done a magic. I would like to see some of the other democracies. In France, of course, one can't compare countries like Pakistan with Europe, but in France, there's yellow vest and orange vest and all sort of protests. They go uninterrupted along with the investments. So we need to actually think of the models whereby we take care of our, include our socio-political dynamics. And socio-political dynamics is some of the unpredictabilities, those would be there. And with those unpredictabilities, we need to facilitate our foreign investors so that they get insulated from whatever is happening on the road, on the street, on other the sphere of life. If people go and they start stoning one of the restaurants because it's a Western chain and that Western country has something to do with the quote-unquote some blasphemic comments, it simply means that that investor, even if he or she was a Pakistani origin, would never think of coming to invest in that country again. So I think these are the type of assurances that are required to investors to attract investment in Pakistan.
So now speaking of, imports, we've seen there have been restrictions for quite some time now, for over a year. How long do you see that stop-start approach to continue in the times to come?
I think that was a wrong approach.
Why is that?
In order to preserve our dollar reserves, government came up with this import restriction policy, which in turn played havoc with our economy.
But so what? Sorry, sir. But what then could have been any alternative? when a
The,
government
the,
is facing such a...
the alternative could have, because what did we achieve by curtailing our imports? We actually restricted import of raw material, which was worst for our exports. We restricted the import of essential items. We saw even many of the medicines which were not available in the markets. We put restriction on many of the essential things which are required to keep our economy running. So while we were able to reduce our current account deficit, we actually affected negatively the production and manufacturing sector, which then provides jobs and livelihood to millions and millions of people. We affected our export units, which attract more dollars. And due to these restrictions, we put pressure on availability of dollars. So, of course, importers, in order to import, they had to find dollars from somewhere. And that somewhere was grey market, which actually then led to further depreciation of value of rupee. And when the gap between interbank and open market dollar rate increased, people they simply stopped using those banking channels. So all the remitters who had to send remittances to Pakistan, they started sending it through Hundi and Hawala. All the exporters who had to receive their payments, instead of using the banking channel, they were receiving it in third country.
So could there have been a way around this, even as we speak, in the coming short term or in the coming long term? Could there be a way around it?
Of course, because this one thing is shortage of dollar, the other thing is panic buying of dollar. So the way around is not to create panic where people, whoever can afford to buy dollar, they start buying dollar and they start storing it there in their private lockers or in their homes. And this is what happened during last 5-6 months, because there was a shortage of dollar and there was a panic. Every day when you wake up and you look at the exchange rate, you find rupee depreciating further, which was a further temptation for people who could hoard the dollar or who could afford to buy dollar to keep on buying, which means more demand, less supply, and a higher rate. So we need the foreign exchange market to function, and it would automatically adjust. So if there is an assurance that dollar availability is there and there is no restriction on demand or supply, at least hoarders, they will not hoard it. They would only hoard it when they know that they can store it for a few days and they can make profit out of it.
So speaking of raw materials, Pakistani export sector, which the government and every policymaker in town and different cities has been stressing that, they need to be encouraged further. My question is then that in circumstances like these, when imports are curtailed, how do you then go about encouraging your exporters to go ahead and restart their game or kickstart their game?
And that's why they're not able to. So, and that's why our last year's GDP, which is, of course, the numbers would be finalized on 30th of June, and they would come somewhere in September, the final numbers. But my personal hunch is that even this 0.3% GDP growth that government feels, then the last national accounts number, even these are very optimistic. So exporters, they were not able to export, especially after super floods. We needed to import cotton. We needed to import cotton yarn in order to meet our textile orders. We couldn't. Similarly, if one looks at various other essential imports for manufacturing, those were not there. Even fertilizer offtake, that was affected very badly. We were not able to import many of the ingredients required for fertilizer. And these things, they have affected our agriculture, they affected our services sector, they affected our manufacturing sector. So you cannot think of growing by snubbing all the three major sectors which contribute to your GDP growth.
But as a policymaker, how would you do it differently than to accommodate these three sectors that you just pointed out?
I think if I have to do it now, we should focus on agriculture.
No, but very tangibly, what would you do as a...
This is what I'm telling you. So we should focus on agriculture, trying to facilitate agriculture sector, which is our bread and butter, but also import substitution in agriculture sector. The only difference between Sri Lanka and Pakistan, when Sri Lanka's macroeconomic indicators were going down, there were already riots on food because Sri Lanka is a net food importing country. Pakistan is a food self-sufficient country. Yes, periodically we have to import wheat, we have to import our edible oil, we have to import our pulses, but predominantly all the minor crops and most of the major food ingredients, those are produced in Pakistan. So we need to see that how one can facilitate agriculture production, agriculture commodity and livestock so that the people's food security is ensured. Now, in order to do it, of course, one has to come up with the different facilitation measure for agriculture. Grow more. Everything that we grow here actually saves us dollars because we are not importing it from any third country. The second, we need to identify certain sectors in manufacturing and production, certain vital sector, and you can take any sector. All we need to do is to provide policy support to that sector, be it textile, be it garments, be it leather, be it these food and beverage or other consumer products which are domestically consumed. You take any sector and start providing it support, policy support as well as the capital support. So if that can be done, you can see that this sector would create jobs. So our major issue right now is inflation, food inflation and fuel inflation. Our second major issue is unemployment. People, they are underemployed or they are not finding the right type of employment. So agriculture sector can take care of your food security, can absorb your unskilled and even semi-literate workforce. Manufacturing and production, it can again create jobs and it can take care of industry. So when industry moves, it's not only the single industry, it's also the small and medium enterprises which are part of that supply chain and value chain. So we need to, and again I'm saying that it's not that thinly spreading our resources. We need to identify any single one or two sectors and start supporting them. Even in services, just take any single sector. For example, tourism. So simply start supporting tourism. Remove the hurdles from which and discourage people to visit our tourist areas. Very simple things. For example, this provision of motels. So right now we know that either there is 5-star hotel or there are the hotels where those who can spend, they would not like to stay. Our provision of clean and hygiene restrooms across your tourist areas, our provision of hygienic food. So these are the things which are required. So there is no rocket science. I think the problems of Pakistan's economy are known to everyone for last 30-40 years. The solutions, they are known to everyone for last 30-40 years. The major issue is, and the major difference is whether we can materialize those solutions, whether we can implement a plan to actually put in practice what we know is a gap between problem and solution.
And if you could put it very briefly, sir, how would some of these measures translate all the support that the government is expected to provide to translate into exports from these sectors? I know the tourism will definitely allow foreign tourists to come in, and that is our tourism export when they're bringing in their much needed forex with themselves. But how about the sector of agriculture and then the other sector of manufacturing?
See, agriculture is basically import substitution. Even if you are not exporting it, if you are not importing wheat, if we are not importing pulses, if we are not importing edible oil, if we are not importing many other food items, it is basically saving dollars. And if you can grow in abundance, of course, you can export it. And not only exporting these primary products in agriculture. So we are one of the fifth largest exporter of mangoes, and you would find Turkish mango juice. Now there are import restrictions, but 6 months ago, you would have found the Turkish and many other brands of mango juice on our shelves. So what stops us from preparing our own quality juice?
Value-added products.
What stops us producing our own cereals? Why we have to import a certain brand of cereal, which is now, of course, is quite expensive, 3,000 rupees for 700 gram or 800 gram pack, even if it's available. So what stops us if we are a major producer of cereal? So not only primary production in agriculture, but value addition, and with this value addition, of course, exporting it. So if we can actually invite some of the multinational cereal producers to come and invest in Pakistan, so why can't we invite Kellogg's to come and produce Kellogg cereal in Pakistan? Of course, they would look at the profitability. We are not a small market. Even if not everyone can afford those cereals, you will safely say that there are 50 to 60 million consumers who can afford to buy those cereals. So why can't we invite them? Of course, it's our investment policy. It's our agriculture produce. It's about the quality and quantity which is required. So quality check and quantity check. And if those things can be done, even agriculture can be a game changer. Similarly, when we are investing in manufacturing, of course, it is import substitution as well as export earning. So a dollar saved is a dollar earned. And we need to actually focus on saving dollar if we can't earn dollar.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abid Q. Suleri. Thank you so much for staying with us through this conversation with Dr. Suleri. Our team works very hard to make this work possible. And it would mean the world to us if you could like and share our content. And if you'd like to stay updated on future podcasts, please hit the subscribe button.